What's up everybody, Demon back, and welcome to a brand new video. This one is the first King Kong Q&A. So with Kong Skull Island coming up here pretty soon, I wanted to start doing these King Kong Q&As because, well, why wouldn't I? If Kong Skull Island's coming up, I'm really excited for it. I love King Kong. I mean, I'm wearing a Godzilla Resurgence shirt, but I love King Kong. And so I figured I wanted to extend the Q&As beyond just Godzilla. I said this in the first Godzilla Q&A. I was going to do King Kong Q&As eventually. And I have 3 questions for it, so this can't be a very long one, but I'm going to go pretty in-depth with these questions just to try and give you guys the full experience of a Q&A, even though I only have 3 questions. This also opens the door for more King Kong questions, so now you guys can send me more. These questions can range from anything as to, like, what do I think's going on in Skull Island, to just what are my predictions, death prediction. I'm doing a death predictions for Skull Island pretty soon. Just this kind of thing, you know. So you guys can send me all your Skull Island related Q&A questions and all your Kong related questions here. Keep Godzilla out of this one. Just keep the Godzilla questions to the Godzilla videos and that kind of thing, right? Just makes it easier on me, more organized. So the first question we're going to be talking about today comes from GabbyZilla2004. And he or she asked, that sounds like a she kind of name, maybe. Sorry if you're not. The question is, what's your favorite King Kong move? Now, I believe the question's supposed to say, what's your favorite King Kong movies? So, my favorite King Kong movies, my number 1 favorite, obviously, number 1 favorite movie of all time, same as my Godzilla, King Kong vs. Godzilla. Can't go wrong with that movie. It's freaking awesome. If you want to know really in-depth on why, go watch the Godzilla-thon for King Kong vs. Godzilla. Just generally, though, it's a lot of fun. I love that movie. I don't have any problems with it like everyone else does. I just think it's incredibly fun. I think it's a great movie, and I can't get enough of it. Now, they also ask the second question, which is Q&A. Do you think Godzilla will appear in Skull Island at the very end? Now, this question is pretty much, I feel like it's already been answered at this point. No, I don't believe Godzilla will show up in Kong Skull Island, and here's a lot of reasons why. Number 1, it's Kong's movie. It is King Kong's movie. We don't need Godzilla in it to bog that down and just distract from Kong's stuff. This is supposed to be Kong's origin story. We want to focus on Kong. We don't need Godzilla thrown in there to distract us from what's important. This is setting up for King Kong vs. Godzilla in 2020. The two are eventually going to meet, and we don't need this in this movie. We don't need Godzilla to show up in this movie because that will take away from Kong's movie. Kong didn't show up in Godzilla 2014. There wasn't even so much as a slight reference to him. I know at the time they weren't planning on doing Skull Island as a part of this universe, but I'm sure it was on their radar, so if they really wanted to, they could have thrown an Easter egg in there. They threw Easter eggs to Mothra into Godzilla 2014, so if they really wanted to, they could have put some in there for Kong, and they didn't. And I don't think we need anything big for Godzilla in this movie. That being said, I think Godzilla is going to play a much larger role in this movie than we realize. No, I don't think Godzilla is going to show up and be doing stuff in this movie, but I think he will be referenced, and here's why. There's a few reasons. Number 1, John Goodman has been out searching for monsters for 30 years. Now, 30 years from the 70s takes us to around roughly the 50s. And in 1954, we awakened something. We woke up Godzilla at the bottom of the ocean, and then we bombed him. The Americans bombed him, Monarch bombed him to try and kill him. I feel like John Goodman knows about this situation. He knows about Godzilla, and he's trying to prove that other monsters out there exist. I feel like John Goodman's going to play a role in Monarch. He's going to be some sort of Monarch person, and he'll be trying to prove the existence of Kong. Now, really, just the fact that Monarch plays a role in this movie in general is already a link to Godzilla 2014, because Monarch was the organization in that movie. We know for a fact from the Godzilla Awakening comic that Godzilla was already around before this point. We also know that from the beginning of G14. So clearly there's going to have to be some sort of reference to another monster having existed. It doesn't have to be stated, oh, the monster is called Godzilla, but it could be stated there is another monster that exists, we blew it up and tried to kill it, something like that. There's going to be some sort of reference to him. And the fact that Monarch is in both movies is the link to the two, and that's what I think I mean And that's what I mean by I think it's going to play a larger role than we realize. No, I don't think he'll cameo in the end, although it would be a nice touch to reference him in the end, to have some sort of setup for it. There's notes on there's notes on the Skull Island map that we have that talk about some sort of monster roaring fire and death or something along those lines. This could be a reference to Godzilla, and I'm sure if we had that line in the movie somewhere, there's another monster, roars fire and death, something like that, that would be a really neat reference to Godzilla, and I think that'd be awesome. But as for Godzilla showing up at the end the same way Tony Stark shows up in Avengers, I don't think that needs to happen, and I don't want that to happen. Now, the final question comes from Barrels101. He asks, or she asks, if you make a King Kong movie, how would your movie play out, and would it be similar to other Kong movies or try to be something new? If I were to make my own King Kong story, pretty much, what would it be? I say story because although he specifically asked the question movies, I wouldn't go for movies. In fact, I have already, and you guys can see the mess on my bed, I was trying to find it. I have already written a lot of stuff, like I wrote a prequel backstory to a comic I wrote, and it was King of Kings Skull Island. I'll get it up there for you guys. I wrote this back in early 2014, before Godzilla 2014 came out, when I was really excited for the release of that. I wrote this. This is the cover for it. It was supposed to be a comic book series, and it was a prequel to the main storyline that I wrote, which was King of Kings. For those of you who know why King of Kings is important to my name, my brand name, that just means that you guys follow me on other social media. So here's the first cover issue. You guys can see it's not in the best condition. I mean, a couple years inside of a box isn't going to do it very good. So here's King of Kings issue 1's cover, so that's pretty sweet. It was just supposed to be like a big crossover comic of all these different kaiju. I included Gappa in there. I had Yongari, Godzilla, Gorosaurus. I included like every single kaiju I could think of, I threw in there. And I had main ones play the parts. The main characters of the comic were Godzilla, Gamera, King Kong, Sonda, and Gyra, which are the Gargantuas, and then I had Jet Jaguar in there a lot too. Here's the third cover issue. You guys can see this was before I learned how to draw, so it's not great artwork. Like I said, this is before I learned how to draw. Now, some people might be questioning, well, whatever happened with these stories? Are you still working on them? No. I mean, King of Kings, I still work on it, but very little. I don't work on it a ton. I'm focusing most of my time towards a different comic series that I'm writing. I'm writing it as a book now, and eventually it'll turn into a comic series, and that is my main story, TLDW. You guys can see this is actually one of the very, very far into the series issues. You guys can see the reference in the title there. This one comes very far into the series. It's a long-running comic series I've been doing for years now, so just a little insight into my life right there. But actually, in recent times, I've kind of stopped with King of Kings and started writing different stories, such as one of my more favorites ones that I'm writing is Prayers for Peace, and that one's a dark horror story surrounding Godzilla. It surrounds, the story is basically about someone whose family members were killed by Godzilla, and they've just basically had to deal with that the rest of their lives. But back to the main question at hand. I know I got really sidetracked there. Back to the main question about that Kong thing that I wrote. How would I handle a Kong story? So that one, in particular, not that I would necessarily always go this kind of direction, but that one was a prequel comic to King of Kings, which meant that it was setting up where Kong came from. It was kind of similar to the Kong Skull Island or the Skull Island book that came out. It's kind of similar to that. It focused before the events of my version's 1933, which was different than the movies, when there was a fishing boat that got stranded, got washed up on shore of Skull Island. They met these natives that had lived there, and by then the natives were civilized, and the natives they weren't there for a ton of time. They were more civilized. They got to know the natives, and they found out a little bit about what was going on there. They saw they were building the wall in this story. They were building the wall. King Kong was like 200 feet in that story. He was like 200 feet, and they didn't want him on the other side of this wall, so they were building this massive wall to keep him out. Kong was on the other side of it. He wouldn't really come into the village in the story because he mostly, like they say in the Skull Island trailer, he mostly keeps to himself. He basically, he stayed up on top of a mountain most of the time. There was a mountain, like a big mountain in the middle of the island, kind of like in 33. He lived there. He would live in a cave in the mountain, and he wouldn't come down out of the cave unless he absolutely needed to. But then I also had it so it was a story about a lot of Kongs. There was tons of Kongs. It was a species of them. They weren't all to the same height. This was King Kong. Different than all the others. He was a mutation, which made him much larger than the others. The others were like, I think I had like 50 to 100 feet. King Kong was 200 feet, and he lived up in this mountain. The rest of the Kongs were all, they would do their own thing out on Skull Island, and they would fight dinosaurs and stuff. Then, because, I had Godzilla show up on the island towards the end of the series. It was a little comic series. It wasn't very long. Godzilla comes up on the island and basically slaughters the entire Kong species. He basically wipes them all out. There was no real reason for it, just because Godzilla came up on the island and then all the Kongs were defending themselves, and he just wiped them out. The atomic breath. They stood no chance. King Kong, however, did stand a chance. He was the only one he fought Godzilla off. Godzilla left the island, and then the events of King of Kings took place in 2014 when Godzilla resurfaced and everything else that happens in that series happens. But there you guys go. That's just a little how would D-Man handle a King Kong series. That's how I would handle a comic series. But as for like a general movie, no, I would definitely stray away from the 33 idea and the 05 idea, as well as I guess 76 somewhat touched up on it, because 76 was somewhat of a remake of 33. I wouldn't stick to that story. I wouldn't make it a love story. I wouldn't do that. I would go more in the direction of Kong Skull Island, if you couldn't tell. I would make a more monstrous Kong. I would not stick to the same story that's been already told, because it's been told pretty much every different way that it can, and it's been told much better than I could ever tell it. So I wouldn't want to tread on that ground, and especially because the 33 film is untouchable. Talk about favorite Kong movies. The 33 film is my favorite King Kong movie other than King Kong vs. Godzilla, and then followed up by the 05 film. So I think that it's already been done before. It's already been better. It's already been done better than I could ever do it. So I would go with a totally new story, have a different Kong, a much different characterization for Kong, much more menacing. A lot, like I said, a lot like what Skull Island wound up doing, which is why I'm incredibly happy with the direction this movie took. So that would be basically the general gist of what would I do with a Kong movie. I would keep it as far away from the original story as I could, while at the same time still remaining faithful to the character of Kong. So thank you guys all for watching. I know this was a pretty off-topic video. Like I said, I had to kind of go really in-depth with these questions because I only got 3 of them so far. So hopefully you guys leave a lot more down below so we can start doing Kong Q&As as well as Godzilla. Thank you guys all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. D-Man, out.